at it.
So, welcome everybody. I'm Ann Keeler Evans, Lewisburg's Poet Laureate, here to talk to you today about women's history and how it matters. I've asked my dear friend and cousin, Kate Bennett, with whom I share some spectacular women and who has told me stories about remarkable women she has known. So, sweet cousin, tell people a bit about who you are and what you did, who mentored you, and whose lineage you're now a part of.
Great big question you asked me, Annie dear. It's so who mentored me? It goes back to the wonderful elementary school teachers and the high school teachers, many of whom were women, but some of whom were men who cared deeply about making sure that we had a good education in Rochester, New York. I babysat for some very interesting women. And I also knew some people through my father, who was a chemist at Kodak, and he appreciated some women that he introduced me to when I was in high school. I probably started meeting really fabulous women. Um, Outside of our grandmothers. Both my grandmothers on both sides had gone to college, which was very unusual for that generation. Both of them were born, of course, before women had the right to vote. In fact, my mother was born before women had the right to vote. And that was always a conversation in our family. I don't think there was a time when that wasn't mentioned in our household. Yet in high school, I didn't really know about Susan B. Anthony, who is a Rochester woman of great renown. And thankfully, kids in Rochester now know about her. I went to a women's college, going to Smith College. I certainly met some powerful women there, powerful professors, and went to the Philippines as an exchange student in my junior year and learned that in the Philippines, I was studying anthropology, that the women were really the power behind the throne. The women were the people who were making the decisions and actually telling me that they had a lot of power. They just didn't show that they had power. And so that was of interesting note. And we, the other lineage piece that is really important to me is that I grew up near Letchworth Park, where Mary Jemison, the white woman of the Genesee, she had been kidnapped by Iroquois Indians, and she chose to stay with the Iroquois when she had a choice to go home. Today we call them Haudenosaunee. Yet she was really a role model for me. This was a woman who made a choice to be a part of a matrilineal culture. And I knew about that part of lineage. So all of those things. Then when I got into the work world, I went into the museum business. And the second museum I worked at was the American Museum of Natural History. And the most famous curator there was Margaret Mead. And she was a force to be reckoned with. She died in 1978. I was there in 72. So I got to know her and I got to know stories about her. I got to ride the elevator with her at the
Right.
museum. So, she sort of rubbed off on me. What an amazing observationist she was. She knew how to look at things and really think through what was happening. So once I was in New York City and there were all these wonderful women around me, um, I just kept meeting more wonderful people.
It's funny to think about your use of the word observational. I think when we're talking about women's history, we haven't been deliberately, we weren't brought up to be deliberately observational about ourselves and the women we knew. And so that is that turns the whole conversation to our becoming historians before we were aware, because we are part of the generation that moved from no history to all of a sudden there's a month for history for women. And I mean, that didn't just come about, but we're part of the force that made it, and we're part of the women who watched it happen. So it's
Right, right.
pretty exciting. Um, well, you actually sort of answered my second question about women outside your life who did spectacular things. And I don't know, I didn't ask you did you have those blue biographies in your in
Yeah, I had orange biographies, and
orange,
my favorite one that I recall is Clara Barton's student nurse.
right?
And she grew up in Dansville, New York. Started Red Cross in the Western New York region. So there was a powerful, and that was probably third or fourth grade
Hmm.
that I was starting to read those. But I don't know why yours were blue and mine were orange.
I don't
Probably a
know.
different binder, but
Right. Or
more
maybe the
important.
next edition of
Could have been, right. I've got a few
but
years on you.
it's very few, but still, yeah. But I mean, I can tell you when I talk about them, I'm always doing this motion with my left hand because you walked into um our library, and I went to a very small school, and you walked into our library and they were right there on the left. There were three shelves of them, and a thing that went around and, back to back. And I'm sure I read my way around it, but
Hmm.
my devotion was to the women's biographies,
Yes.
which gave us ideas about things that were different. But I was wondering whether or not, because of, although, listening to you talk and getting to Margaret Mead, but I wondered whether or not you had to read a lot of the men's biographies too, to begin to understand what you wanted and what might be possible for your life, for you to end up where you are as a museum person and a,
Yeah, it's interesting. I was never very interested in European or Western history.
mhm,
I was always interested in other cultures. So what I was reading eh, eh, was always either something from Spain, or because I wanted to learn Spanish in high school. I thought that was more useful than French because I knew more people spoke Spanish in the world. I never had the understanding that women weren't in our history books. And I don't know why that didn't occur to me. Only 10% of the statues in the country, 10% are women.
right.
And it's like it didn't even occur to me I wasn't there. And I credit my family, my parents, my grandmothers, both of them, for being clear that they were important.
Mhm.
My mother was certainly clear she was important. And so I don't know that I noticed that we weren't in history
I don't know that I
till
noticed it.
college, maybe. Right.
What? Pardon?
Until maybe college, I started noticing that.
Right, right. Yes, but I just think it was instinctual that I gravitated towards story and history where women were.
Yes.
And I think it helped. And I think, I didn't have some of the stuff you did because it took me far longer to settle on what I needed to be doing. I mean, I'm 72. Now I'm poet laureate, and I feel when that happened, I sort of had that feeling of, oh, this is what Tiggers do and Tiggers like. And so,
Right. I think I got very lucky that I landed in a museum
mm,
in 1972. 2. I all of a sudden I was there and I had an opportunity at a museum and I said, "Oh, I could do this for the rest of my life."
Right, right,
I think there is a lot of luck involved in that.
right, right, right. So, looking at that, is there a point though when you realized as you were as a museum person and you were setting things up that there needed to be an uncovering of women's roles, that there was that women's history was often hidden history, particularly not emphasized and trying to be brushed aside by the you know the status quo when you I'm sure there are plenty of there are plenty of things I saw in museums where women had babies, you know, and not power until,
Right.
you know.
Um, Again, perhaps it was sheer luck, or maybe I was guided. But when I left the American Museum of Natural History, I went to the Staten Island Children's Museum and became director. And children's museums have always been a very interesting subset of museums. They're different than
Mm,
museums because they were part of the hands-on movement that believed that you created exhibitions with the community rather than for the community. So the minute you start doing focus groups with people that you want to have visit you, you have a lot of moms and girls
right,
sitting in your focus groups.
right,
Actually, more than you have men. You have moms, girls, and boys in my generation um, in the 80s. So uh, I always had that point of view coming into our exhibits. And the Children's Museum movement was also very quick to understand that not all children were being treated equal in the world, and that it was really important to make room for children with different abilities, for um, not only boys and girls, but different races, different ethnic groups, different socioeconomic groups. So we were paying attention to that early on. So our exhibits really came out of the what do you want to know question that we would ask people. Like when we did an exhibit on insects, we said to the focus groups, what do you want to know about insects? And so, one of the kids said to us, I want it to be beautiful, otherwise my mom won't come, and I love insects.
wow,
So, this was a little boy telling us what he knew about an entry point for his mom. So, together we were able to make it interesting for him and available for others who might not find it interesting. So
right,
again, we were guided in a way that I didn't feel like I was doing the guiding. I was a vessel in that way, and it's a lovely. Children's museums are just lovely in that way, and they are everywhere in the country and a good place for kids to learn about learning who have different learning styles.
right. Meanwhile, I was working on Wall Street and then entered the church, neither one of which were
Right?
particularly good about soliciting other people's opinions
Oh,
about and
right,
creating different learning environments,
right, right,
because the structures become as uh, important as the important to their notion of history as whatever it is they're doing or teaching. So that was a it was always important to have you around. Um, and I was going to say, it's so interesting yesterday, which was not on our questions we were going to talk about, but that's what you do with friends, right? is that I was listening to a conversation between Israeli and Palestinian women about how to participate, how to bring about peace, and peace that is not just some interim fake walled in event. And one of the things they spoke about on both sides, and I guess actually there was an Afghani woman also, but she was saying that the people who make peace are men with guns, and women and their children aren't invited to the um, truces and the treaties that are being made, and talking about the importance of that. And another woman who said, my son was killed and I wanted to kill people. And I realized that I must, in my son's blood, make changes that would protect my other children and also protect all of the mother's children.
Mhm.
When I say there wasn't a dry eye on the screen or in the group of us that were listening, I mean, to think about having to make those choices, and when instinct is not to is to strike back if you've been challenged. And um
Yeah,
so
we need more women
we need more women, and at
leading,
the
thinking
wo-
about our
thinking
children.
thinking about our children.
Yeah, it's as,
Bec-
as simple as that, perhaps, and as complex.
right. And then one of them was saying, talking about also our men, that one of the things they're seeing in Afghanistan, because girls have to stop going to school at 10 or 11, is when fathers reduce their work to come home to teach their girls.
Oh,
And she talking about watching men go forward in a crossing where it's going to be complicated, and moving to the front and assisting that crossing. And it was a really it was such a powerful reminder about peace. And we think often about peace, but how are we participants in it at levels that make a difference in the world? It was interesting. um I think you've talked a lot about museums and how women's history was a driver, but I think there are still many people in this country who are not aware that there's a Hall of Fame, a Women's Hall of Fame.
it,
So tell me about it. When did it get started? When were you involved with it? You know, tell us where you wound up there. And
surely. I've lost my Zoom ability to see you, so I don't know where you are, but let's assume you're on
I'm
the
in,
other end of my screen.
Mhm.
Sorry, I had a phone call come in. I think that I went to Rochester, New York to lead the Rochester Museum and Science Center in 1996. And shortly thereafter, I was approached by a woman who was um, at the end of her life who very much wanted to bring another museum person, although she had not been a museum person, but she'd been a person who really cared deeply about this organization in Seneca Falls called the National Women's Hall of Fame. And she asked if I would please get involved in this because it was so very important that this organization go on into the future. It had been started in 1969 by a group of people in Seneca Falls who said, we need to commemorate what happened in Seneca Falls in 1848, the Women's Rights Convention that Elizabeth Cady Stanton and Lucretia Mott and others put together, which was the starting of the suffragist movement in the United States. And anyway, she said this organization was started in 1969 to recognize great American women. And it's very important that we identify great American women and we induct them into this Hall of Fame because the stories of women are not known. And so I got intrigued by it and started in. Um, uh, being involved, and I was on the board twice for 9-year stints and have just recently gone off the board. But I'm very proud to say that we've inducted more than 300 women into the National Women's Hall of Fame,
That's wonderful.
and they're all American citizens. And the way we know about these women is that people throughout the country and the world nominate these women to be in the hall, and then we send them to judges who are knowledgeable in the various fields, and they help us determine who should be inducted at these various years. So it's very hard if you have passed away, and if you're no longer alive, it's very hard to get into the Hall of Fame because it turns out there are tons of very remarkable women that broke glass ceilings in every single different discipline forever, and their stories need to be told.
Right. It's so exciting. And
It is
I
exciting.
think about, I mean, that's really what I'm looking for us to do in this exercise that we'll do when we're gathered as a group, is to write these little 5-line poems um just about women we have known. And people say, why 5 lines? And I say they fit on a post-it note. It's the right size. And that's, what matters. And they don't have to be high poetry. They just have to mean, I know you. And
I know
um,
you, and you made a difference.
exactly. And
And that is what we want to lift up,
right. I am more me because of you.
right? And you were brave.
Right.
And you stepped out, you did things. Um, as sometimes people who we've inducted into the hall, in order to be in their various um, businesses, like Julie Crone is one of my favorites. She's an inductee who is a horse racer, the first woman who won a horse race of significance, and she had to sneak on to Kentucky Downs. She was not allowed to walk in the door, but she snuck on and she got a job, and she started tending to horses. And then somebody said, I want to teach you how to ride. And she rode and she won.
Right. And it's so significant that, as you say, we break barriers every place.
Yes.
And that's just, you know, so it's so important for all of us because, and I think when you'd said before, you made a difference. No, you made a difference in me. You made a difference in you, but you also made a difference in me. And I stand taller, walk farther, dig deeper, laugh louder because you
Right.
were here.
Right. We stand on each other's shoulders.
Yes. and sit by each other in tea in tea shops, or living rooms, or and egg each other on and remind ourselves that we are strong and beautiful, and it's important. And I'm hopeful that as people who are sitting listening to us have this conversation, that we aren't only women among us, that there will be men who feel the need to memorialize and lift up and
Oh, I think that's absolutely true. I think that we have many, many, many allies, and we all have much work to do to really investigate how we feel about this,
Mhm.
the whole curriculum, because obviously we were raised to be demure and to take a back seat. And it's not always easy to come forward. And sometimes some of us can make more progress by being behind the scenes. And, still there's nothing wrong with that. And it's nice to have allies.
Right. It's funny to think about death. I mean, I think that's absolutely true, but I think you and I may have flunked the demure part of the
Oh, I was in plenty of meetings where I was the only woman for
Oh, of
years.
course, of
Yeah.
course. But
And I didn't flunk demure then.
right,
I wish I had spoken up more in many cases.
right. But that's time in the world and age. I mean, when I look at, I mean, because I've been in, religious work and social services, there are so many women, it's the odd man who's in the crowd.
Right.
And so so you see that and it's just changing. I mean, I too went to a women's college, and it almost fell apart in 1979. I graduated in 1974. And the young women that we worked with who were 5 years behind us were completely different than we were, and much stronger in sense of they were going out into the world, they were going into business,
Right.
they were change makers in different ways than we had been. And it was fun to see, and that's the great thing about having gone to schools like we did and being able to go back to reunions, and you get to see generations that come behind you.
Mhm.
Yeah. So, is there anything else you feel like you want to mention here?
I am thrilled that you are doing this and you bring it forward. The funny thing is for years I always found it difficult to celebrate Women's History Month in March. Running a museum, you had to, you had to choose what month, and it was always ridiculous to have to jam blacks into February and women into March. Why not all year round? Um, and I have really come to appreciate that we take a moment and really tell these stories because, so many different places when you turn on the TV or you turn on a radio or a podcast, people are paying attention to making sure stories are told. So I'm understanding more and more that there needs to be a month. And wouldn't it be wonderful when we don't need that?
Right. And it strikes me as you say that we are recording this on International Women's Day.
Yes.
And I have a small handcraft I will send you a picture of, that will be at the top of information I hand out here, but is a picture, it's a quilt that a woman has embroidered with ghost suffragettes. And so it's their four suffragettes, and it's just lovely. You would love it. Your mother would have loved it, you know, and generations back. So,
That is wonderful.
yeah.
the suffragists have been, they really stood tall.
Mhm.
And we are the fourth generation, I think, on standing on their shoulders.
Right, right. And
Fourth wave.
and we need to make it work.
We do.
Yeah.
We do.
Kate, thank you so much for coming along with me to my event.
I
And
love the work that you are doing, Annie.
I'm so excited
Proud.
about it.
Yeah.
I'm so excited about it. I mean, the young man who, sort of devised this thing and um was part of the process that approved me for it, came to see work we were doing the other night in the bar when we were having readers, poets read their poems and have them responded to with gongs. And he was like, "Was this all we had to do? We just had to give her permission and a title?" And I'm like, "Yes." Yes. And here we go. We're having fun and
Yeah. It's
poetry and all the
and
other.
you're making community, and
Right.
it's such an important piece. That's how we make peace. We make community.
Exactly. Exactly. And we're providing opportunities to come out into the world after we've been so shut in.
Yeah.
And it really matters to all of us to like, "Oh, there you are." Yeah.
Right.
I love you, cousin Kate,
I love you, Annie.
and we'll talk soon.
Be well.
Be well. Thank you so much.
Bye-bye.
Bye.